Thanks. Hello, everyone. Good evening, the night before the storm. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the Ken Joy collection, which is a collection of photographs at the Kennebunk Free Library. It's a collection of well over 1,000 photographs that I had the pleasure of archiving about 20 years ago. Ken Joy, for those of you who don't know who he is or what he did, he was a rabid, I'll go right past avid to rabid historian, much like myself, and he used to write a newspaper column in the local newspaper called Out of the Past. And he wrote several articles throughout the years that he was a columnist, and all of those columns have been saved and can be viewed at the Brickstore Museum. And when he passed in 1980, he wore many hats. He was also the town historian. Everybody seemed to want to give him photos to, so that he could be enabled to do his column. And so he amassed quite a collection. And when he died in 1980, the collection of photographs came to the Kennebunk Free Library. And I know where it started about 20 years ago, but I don't know where they were originally kept from 1980 to when I got on board. But when I arrived in 1980, they were kept in a small 2-drawer filing cabinet in a back room of the library. And I was kind of the second person who'd had a chance to start archiving these images and having a look at them. The first person was Stephen Burr, and he kind of paved the way a little bit with getting them, quite a lot actually, by getting them all organized by topic. So they went from a pile of photographs into folders, and each folder was kind of representative of a topic. Say one would be fires, one would be schools, and so on and so forth. So that he started that process. And then when I came on board, I was encouraged by Sandy Armentrout to go through and archive them as we were doing the same with the photographs that would come into the Brickstore Museum. We wanted to kind of have a continuity of how we would archive them. And so as a leg up in that, although I was the ed archivist at the Brickstore Museum, I was lucky enough to take a class at the Beinecke Rare Books Library down in Yale. And it was on identifying photographs and care of photographs, which I found invaluable, because a lot of people don't know that there are so many different kinds of photographs, and knowing what kind of photograph really helps you date a photograph, and learning how to take care of them is really important, because a lot of old photographs you'll see lying around, like even in our own homes, they're not protected in archival sleeves. Some of them are in wooden frames, and wood is an acid that can ruin photographs. So I learned a lot about that. So when I dove in to do the archiving, and it took a good number of years to get it done, it seemed like, I was fascinated by the types of photographs and just the dates from what was covered. And so I'm just going to kind of do a brief little bit before I jump to share screen on, for those of you who don't know the different types, I'll just give you a brief overview. The first type of photograph was invented in 1839 in France, and it's called a daguerreotype type. And you've probably seen those in antique stores, or maybe you have some in your house, and they come in these little cases, and inside is the photograph, and it's usually a reflective surface, and you never want to open these cases up because the air will ruin the photograph. These are called daguerreotypes. So that was the first way that people could capture portraits and images, other than having them painted for them with oil and canvas. That was quickly replaced in 1860 by something called a carte de visite. We call them CDVs. They're these mini cards. I liken them to like baseball sports cards. They're very, very thin. And they became like trading cards to people. People would, get their portraits done, send them to relatives. They were very popular during the Civil War. Your soldier loved ones going off to war, you'd get your CDV done. So that was the next kind. Kind of in the same time period were photographs called tin plates. They were actually manufactured on tin, and that can date anywhere from 1850 to 1860s on. I've seen some actually done kind of retro back in the 1920s with somebody goofing around trying to recreate the look, but mostly they're 1850s, 1860s for tin types as well. The next type of photo is the one most people who look at old photos are familiar with. These are called cabinet cards. They are printed on a heavy cardstock, and they were really popular from 1870 on, and they were mostly used for portraits, although there are obviously several of landscapes and so on and so forth. The Brownie camera was introduced in 1905, and of course it opened photography up to the average person. There was no longer, you didn't have to go into a studio and sit rigid and get your photo taken. So you could go with your little Brownie camera and have film developed. And of course, the snapshot came into play. So that's kind of the progression of photography. Postcards came in about 1905, and you could get, there'd be traveling photographers who'd come and take pictures of your home, and you could buy pictures of those. And we see a lot of those on the internet for sale on eBay and so forth. But that was about 1910 when cars, 1905, when cars were invented as well, so people could tour around to places and use their cameras and have postcards of where they visited. I'm going to try my little split screen and see if I can master it tonight. Let's say, it's not going to let me do that. Bear with me. All right. Hopefully this will work. How's that? Can you see that, everyone? Okay, great. So just as a quick recap, we've got a whole bunch of photographs that are in the world. Another type of photograph is called a stereopticon, stereo card. It also was invented 1850, 1870, and you could use it with a stereo viewer, and it kind of was the precursor to moving pictures. It kind of gave you a dimensional kind of view of what you were looking at. And you could use the stereo viewer to kind of tour the world through these cards that were peddled. So again, the recap is the 1850s, you've got your cartovis, I just call them CDVs, it's easier. Your daguerreotypes, which were the first ones that came in after portrait painting. You've got your tin types, which I showed you. And this is a stereo view machine. The card would go into this little holder here, and you would look from the other end at the card, and it would kind of blend the images together and give you kind of a depth to what you were seeing. There's mostly, in the Ken Joy collection, there are mostly photographs of, obviously they're mostly local photographs for one thing. There are no daguerreotypes. There's a very few CDVs. And I haven't come across any tin types in that collection, well, with the exception of one that's actually quite a large one. And so just as an example, this cabinet card here is interesting because it shows you what is now, what we know as Duffy's Tavern and that in the Lafayette building. This is a factory shot of workers working there at the turn of the century, which I love because you can see all the different pulleys and the women working there, and it's pretty fascinating. And then a lot of the photographs in the Ken Joy collection, sadly, aren't really, they're not labeled. I mean, we're all guilty of that. We take a photograph of somebody and that person will never be, we won't know who that is. But luckily, he was pretty good about writing down the names of individuals. So that was very helpful. But again, these are examples of some of the cabinet cards that are in the collection. This is an image that was captured on a glass plate negative. That's a pretty popular device that was used at the turn of the century to make photographs. I always liked images made from glass plate negatives because they are pretty clear, and you can still, if you are in possession of glass plate negative, you can still make a really great photo from those negatives today. If you were standing on the top of what is now Duffy's, looking down the river, this is what you would have seen circa 1900. The massive building on the right was it had many incarnations, but it was known as the paper mill. There was also a sash and blind company over there. All of the buildings down on the left side of the river, which runs down Water Street, have pretty much been removed. There was another dam below there. Some of the buildings have been turned into condos, but this is what you would have seen at the turn of the century. So it's kind of remarkable that if you were standing at what's now like the Cumberland Farms, which is behind this building here, it would have looked totally different back then. And that's what's remarkable about the collection, is you can go in there and see so many different aspects of the town that just, take your breath away. And again, about 1905, out came our handy brownie cameras and our postcards. And this is a similar view. One is a snapshot and one is a postcard that both show the grandstand that used to be down at Park Street School, down at the big playground, Parsons Field. And that no longer stands, obviously, but it's kind of neat to be able to date this to circa 1910 because it was standing then. It was called the New Athletic Field back then. This is the man of the hour. This is Ken Joy. Ken was born in 1908 and he died in 1980. He, besides writing the column for years and years and years, he was just a huge correspondent with older people of the community. He did a lot of letter writing to people in the generations before him that were still living to try to get some of the firsthand narratives that they could tell him, so that he could then, of course, write it down for all of us to enjoy. He also wrote a book, and this book can be found, well, this is my copy. You can see it's kind of mothy eaten on the side, but it can be found at the library, I'm sure. It can be found at the Brickstore Museum. It can be purchased online, typically for about 20 bucks if you go on something like eBay. And it was a book, he kind of did a capsule summary of some of his articles that he had written for the newspaper. And I highly recommend it. It's a fun book. So when I got done archiving the collection, it was still in archival folders. The photographs were separated by archival paper, and it still took up 2 filing cabinet drawers in this room off the desk area of the library. Since then, the library has been terrific. They have put all of these photos into plastic archival sleeves and put them into these archival boxes, and I think there are 12 of these boxes now in that room, so it's a much better, safer environment for these photographs, and I applaud them for having done that. Just to kind of share, I wanted to just share some of the pluses of having these old photographs. Obviously, we can look back on time and see a whole lot of changes. We can learn about dating photographs. Obviously, this is a very, very old one of the wedding cake house that people can recognize readily. This, obviously, to me, I don't know if it is to everybody else, is what's now the Brickstore Museum. The dirt roads is a giveaway. When you're dating photographs, you can sometimes say, well, what year did telephone poles come in? So we can clearly say that this is not a 1700s photo because it has an 1800s, late 1800s telephone pole in it. So that's kind of helpful when you're trying to date photos and to know what you're talking about. You have to kind of keep your eye out for some of those things to be able to date them. So Ken's collection does cover mostly Kennebunk, but it also covers parts of Kennebunkport, although not a whole lot. I love this image. It is coming over the bridge into Dock Square. This is a restaurant that was called, at that time, it was an inn called the Norton House. And it obviously burned down. And right now, today, in that same spot, you would find Hurricane's Restaurant. Another great photo, unfortunately, tells us what we have lost, because in a lot of the photos in the Ken Joy collection, the buildings no longer stand. So this Nathaniel Jeffords house was at the head of Brown Street. And if you are looking at that gambrel roof building there, that was called the Gilpatrick Mansion. But these buildings were both torn down in the not so distant past. What you can recognize now is the barn of the Jeffords home is now part of Deering Lumber. And that's the only part that still stands, this piece right here. But what I love about this photograph is how everybody's decked out in their finest. They're showing off their horses, their carriages. There's people peering out of the windows. It's a remarkable photograph. It just kind of shows how people lived in that time. And again, this is probably closer to an 1870s image, 1870s, 1880s, just because of no trees, no trolley tracks, dirt grounds, again, dating the photograph. This was on the beginning slide. And again, this is just shows you how people kind of made a living in Kennebunk. This was the good old worsted matting company, I guess is the best way to say it. They made floor mats. And I can't imagine working there. Look at these gals all, dressed in heavy garments. And I'm sure that was a hot, unair-conditioned building because they didn't have it back then. And I'm sure it was also dangerous at times. But you can look out those windows and still realize that that building still stands. It just has different uses now. Let's see if I can go on to the next one. This is another, I just like pointing out the ones that are really fun from the collection. This one shows you Ocean Avenue, and the only thing that's recognizable probably to you is the River Club house here. That is now, this is all dirt in here, and the river, yacht club is over here now, but it's just kind of neat to see all these buildings, how Ocean Ave looked back then. Ken Joy's collection has a lot of student photos. So if you're looking for Granny, and she went to school in 1910, most of the photos in the collection are identified. So you can go and look at the back of this photo, for instance, and see the name. So if your family's from here, it's a great resource to go and maybe catch a photo of a past relative of yours. I love this one with its little Valentine drawings up on the board. I think she's leaning on a chair, but hopefully she's not wielding a stick. This was taken Labor Day, 1906, I believe it was. And what we're looking at here is Main Street before it was paved, before there was trolley tracks, and this is the Baptist church right here. And it's just kind of, it's neat to see the two girls looking on here. It's just a very, very clear photo of Main Street of that era. Again, in our world of dating photos, you can certainly see that this is way past the 1800s. And if you're a car buff, you can see that there's a Woody automobile over here. You've got gasoline stations now, and obviously the Kennebunk Inn. So you're moving ahead in time, but what you don't see anymore, obviously, are these gigantic elm trees that died of Dutch elm disease. But again, it's nice to go back and there's the water company that still exists today and just see how it looked back then. Specials today, 50 cents, 15 cents, lobsters, chickens, steak, chops. Boy, those are good prices. This is one of the older photos, not the oldest photo, of Main Street looking north. So if you are standing at the head of Brown Street and in the middle of the road between Dairy Queen and where Hot Diggity Dog Stand is, there was a lawn there and a house there at this time. And this was, again, you have to kind of go by dating. You look at, and you see there's telephone poles. So telephone poles came in 1884 to Kennebunk-ish. Don't quote me on that. And so you know it's after that. You've got some electric lighting, or maybe gas lanterns, you're not sure. Dirt roads, and what's glaringly obvious is the elephant. It's kind of like, what's the elephant in the room? This is the elephant. So in looking through old newspapers, I was able to date this photograph to June of 1888, when a circus came to town, and they camped out at the Park Street for the evening and on their way to Biddeford. And that was pretty common. Barnum and Bailey was a big circus back then. They had several different kinds of I counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 different circuses that would be in the area in the summers of the 1880s. And I think it's kind of fascinating to see the decorations on the carts, all the horses carrying the people. I can't see it in my photo, but way over to the right behind this man, there's a circus photo, a sign plastered on a wall. So again, it's catching a glimpse of Kennebunk. What's sad is none of these photos in this photograph still stand, not one. A lot of that was due to the 1903 fire, but it's just how the town has changed over the years. The elephant is standing approximately right smack in the middle of the bridge. You can see the metal bridge abutment here. Then there was whimsical photos. Not all of them were, taken to mark a place in time. This one just seemed to catch the photographer's eye, and that dog's long gone, but he's well loved and remembered now because of the collection. You can also see in the collection contrast of times. For instance, the Ross block used to be only 2 stories tall, and they added another story, and all the dates can be recorded, obviously. There's a water trough here. There was a bike shop once in here, and then they added a 3rd story later on. So it's kind of neat to see those changes evolve as well. This is a picture, I'm not sure you can guess. This picture is of what was called the counter factory. And if you have any shoes with like a formal shoe with a backing on them, especially men's shoes, in the very back of the heel is something called a shoe counter, and it keeps the shape of the back of the heel firm. And that was all this factory created, and it was in what I call the gully off of you take from Water Street to Depot Street, and the street up here is actually Park Street. The back of the house is on Park Street. And at the end of Park Street, where it turns into Grove, there's a little trail that is still there. You can see that came down the hill. In fact, my kids used to use it for sledding. But all of these buildings are long gone. The collection also has tons of photos of high school kids as well as elementary that we saw before. I love the old football outfits and the bloomers the girls had to wear. I mean, look at those shoes, for God's sakes. It's kind of funny. But this was their high school was on Park Street at that time. It's now Avesta Housing. But there's a lot of photographs in the collection of athletic events, and again, they're pretty well labeled. And if you do have ancestors here in town, you can certainly get a laugh and pull up some copies of photos. This particular photo shows the old town hall, and people began building buildings in brick thinking that they were fireproof, and it turns out that they weren't, obviously, because this one burned down. This old town hall / opera house was where the fireman little park is, across from town hall. This being Route 1 here, this being Main Street, that going to Summer Street. And now there's some benches and some monuments there. But obviously their idea about brick buildings didn't hold fast, and it did burn down shortly to be rebuilt in its new form where the town hall stands now in 1921. This is similar to the elephant photo, and I'm showing it because it's kind of, again, marks time. It's about the same era, except for, I want you to pay attention to this building here on the left. This was called Tomlinson's store. And I think it's kind of one of those fun photos in the collection. In 1936, we had a great big flood, and Tomlinson's store decided to fall into the river. And obviously had to be torn down, but it's just, I'm glad somebody caught this on, you know, in a photograph, because otherwise we wouldn't have a record of it other than maybe an obscure news article somewhere. But it's great to see it in a photograph. You can see the Moxie sign in there, and everybody standing about checking it out. But that's one of my favorite shots from the collection. This, and as I said, when Stephen Burr was on board, he was really great about, you know, putting everything into different groupings, and there turned out to be a lot of fire-related photographs. In addition to the town hall, we had the horrible fire of 1903. This one was taken by a photographer named B.J. Whitcomb. There were several photographers in town. There was a gentleman named Whitcomb. There was another one named Albion Moody. There were itinerant photographers that would come through town, one named Chickering. So because Ken wrote his column, people would just donate these photos to him, which is great because now they are preserved for us. But the fire of 1903, you can well see what was devastating. It took out the grist mill, it took out the shoe, it took out, I mean, everything, the factories at that corner, took out some of the buildings on Main Street. It was quite the blaze. It started in one of the factories. They don't really know how it started, but it started in the factory that once stood where the Lafayette Center now stands. But that's pretty graphic. And where these folks are standing right here now is Rotary Park. And this is what they had to fight the fires with. So you can kind of see that it probably wasn't an easy task. This was Safeguard Fire Company, and it was on Fletcher Street, what is now the parking lot of the Kennebunk Savings Bank. But on the back, these gentlemen are named, and it was a nice looking building in its day, I thought. But that's kind of one of their pumpers, and how that they and with their ladders and how they would try to fight these enormous fires. So also what's great is if you want to look for a picture of your house, how it looked, if you have an older house, you can sometimes find a copy of what it used to look like. This one obviously is on of the salt box on Summer Street, and it shows how it used to look before the barn was taken and separated from it. And it's just kind of a nice old photo. I mean, in all of these photos, I shouldn't say all, but most of these photos, it's great to see the old trees and how they used to be so tall, the elm trees and whatnot. So it's a good resource. So you're probably wondering, well, how do I look at these photos? You can't just, obviously because of COVID, you can't just go in and fall through the photos. What I did was, and it's looking like I need to redo them, is I created index books of the collection, and it's alphabetical. So if you're looking for something, say on Fletcher Street, you would go to the F book, and I photocopied the majority of the collection into these books. So there's a reference, and this lives on the bottom shelf. The librarians can tell you where. And it kind of saves the photographs from, you know, having to be handled. I guess we'll have to ask Allison at the end of this, but if somebody wants to have a copy made, that would have to be a conversation with the library. But if this is your first start and where you go to actually try to find what you're looking for, and as I said, it is all alphabetical, and it's a real good finding aid for the collection. And that's about it for that. We'll go back to this view. So, any questions? I didn't put the whole collection on here. We'd be here all night.
Let me fix it so everybody can unmute themselves. Yeah, you should be able to unmute yourselves now if you want, or you can put questions in chat if you're not comfortable. And let me chime in about, we are not able to let people in to look at things for now, even the collection, the binders, but we could photocopy something from the binder for you if you're looking for a specific name or subject. And hopefully this will be over soon.
Down the road, right? Down the road when access is back and given to the library, that's going to be, that'll be a great resource. I always emphasize that the Brickstore Museum is also a partner resource for photographs, but finding aids like the index will help people, try to, like I said, either find an ancestor or just maybe they want to see a photo of Kennebunk of old and they want to have a copy in their home or their office or whatever. The finding aids is the first place to go because there are, as I said, I counted about 1,200 plus photographs in the collection. So it's easier going through the books to find copies of them first.
I have a question.
Sure.
So when the circus was going down the street and there were those stores, as you approached the bridge, there was a large, it wasn't Lafayette Center as we know it because, but there was a large building. Was that some sort of factory as well on the left?
Yep, there were several factories in that spot, but that was the, I'm trying to think of which mill that was that burned down. But that was a shoe factory at that time, I believe.
Okay.
And that's the one where the fire originated in that big building. Hey, Bill. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I guess I'll sign off and you can see this on YouTube if you didn't catch it tonight. And thanks for tuning in.
Thank you, Kathy.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.